1.
Welcome to the Progressive Hour. This, of course, is reflective of the visionary leadership of our great president, Dr. Timothy Stewart, where we are utilizing technology to keep you informed as to what is going on for such a time as this. And so I salute our distinguished president for his leadership, for his vision, and for his creativity. Let me proceed to introduce our star-studded panel. We have entered into a season in the aftermath of what many have termed the most consequential election in several lifetimes. And so with that being the case, we want to make sure that if the arc of the moral universe bends toward justice, that we are doing our part to push that particular arc. And so this star-studded panel will help us do just that. Begin with Dr. Ralph Canty, one of our former presidents. Dr. Ralph Canty has distinguished himself not only as a preacher par excellence, we know him as a progressive and visionary pastor. We also thank God for his leadership as a past president of the Progressive National Baptist Convention. As a young preacher, I recall with fondness hearing about Dr. Canty and the great things that were being done during a time when social justice had been pushed to the back burner, and yet Dr. Canty continued to push prophetically. And so as a consequence, we are heirs to a rich legacy because of Dr. Ralph Canty. And so Dr. Canty, we salute you, we thank God for you, and we thank God for the sage that you are going to bring, the sagacity you're going to bring to this conversation. Of course, I cannot wait to hear from that amazing treasure and jewel. I'm talking about Dr. Willie Francois. No, just kidding. I'm talking about the Reverend Dr. Jewel London. Dr. Jewel London is working in a very profound way. And I respect so much the fact that she not only works behind the scenes to ensure that what happens on stage, on the platform, is done with a sense of excellence, but at the same time, she knows how to take the stage. And when she takes that stage, she takes it with power. And God uses her both as a preacher and teacher of the word of God. She is a gift to the church and a gift to Progressive. And so we welcome the Reverend Dr. Jewel London. We're also, of course, excited to welcome that prophet without peer. I maintain he has one of the highest social justice IQs anywhere. I'm talking about that Morehouse grad. I'm talking about the Reverend Dr. Willie Francois. You can't talk about Morehouse without adding he's also a Harvard man. You can't talk about that without talking about the fact that last year he earned his doctorate in ministry degree. And so we are honored to have this preacher par excellence. He partners with me in giving leadership to our Social Justice Commission. And so we salute you, preacher par excellence, Dr. Willie Francois. And then, of course, our visionary, our great president. When you introduce LeBron James, you just basically say his name because everybody knows that's LeBron James. So y'all, I could just say Dr. Timothy Stewart, and that's all we need right there. But please know, when you talk about one with a prophetic track record of social justice leadership and activism, and on top of that, progressive, here's the beautiful thing. He has a global vision. And so, yes, we're going to talk about the consequences of the election that we just had, but we also recognize that you are a part of an empire, progressive. We are a part of an empire that has tentacles that are far reaching. And the question now is, what are we going to do? How can we as a progressive family, in the tradition of Martin Luther King Jr., L. Venture Booth, William Augustus Jones Jr., Gardner C. Taylor, Prathia Hall, how are we going to hold up that mantle, that prophetic mantle, with a global consciousness for such a time as this. And so I welcome you to what promises to be an engaging, enlightening, and I hope it will be a prophetically provocative conversation that we are going to engage in during this progressive hour. Let me begin by raising the question. And of course, we all know that this election has been something the whole world was watching. And so our theme for this conversation is the election is over, what's next? I think before we move to what's next, we need to raise the question, and that is, what lessons should we have learned from the election about the soul of the United States and the power of the Black church? That's kind of wide, but I want us to just kind of take a look. And I'd love to hear Dr. Jewel London. You begin this conversation. What lessons do we learn about the soul of this country? Because it really is something of interest that, in spite of white supremacy and racism, xenophobia, sexism, toxic masculinity, and an allergic reaction to truth, what President Obama refers to as truth decay, all of that was embodied in this administration, and yet he got 11 million more votes this time than he did last time. What does that say about the soul of this country?
I would actually say, Dr. Haynes, and thank you so much for raising this question. I'm certainly honored to be here with each of you. One of the things that I would say is that it is truth telling to see that our country is so uniquely divided, to know that there were less than or right at 5 million votes separating our candidates, and there are such an opposing views on either side. And to think that there are as many people in this country who hold as strongly to their views of holding, and I would dare to say more from an economic perspective than anything else, more so than the welfare of all people. And so when you look at these two opposing views that were raised in this election, you got the candidates that are for all people, and you have the candidate as predominantly for one people. And that one people were so ingrained in their thoughts and in their heritage and in their thought patterns that they were willing to sacrifice all people for the few. The other thing that I think is so truth telling and is sad at the same time, when you look at the demographics of those who voted for each of the candidates, one of the things that I did notice was there was an increase in the African American male vote for President Donald Trump, as well as the Latino vote. And so it's interesting when you find yourself talking about you want to get away from a dictatorship style leadership, but yet you fell right into it. It's very, very challenging. And when I have conversations with friends who well, I guess you can call them friends who voted the other way, it was surprising to me to hear that their number one reason for doing so was because of the economy, regardless of the fact of the number of people who would be continuously marginalized and discriminated against, and no concern for children who are still in cages. And so it's very disheartening, is what it is. Very disheartening to see that our country is so divided.
Yeah. Dr. Canty, I'd really be interested to, and I thought about you as again, I looked at the fact that 72 plus million people voted for the outgoing president, and he continues to demonstrate the fact that he doesn't care anything about people, because while people are dying every day from COVID, he hasn't met with the task force since October. Or October 2nd, I hear. So the question is, you know, what is your perspective about the soul of this nation?
Let me say that in this election, if I had one word to say, it is revelation. The 2020 election was God's most recent revelation to his people to help us understand what we're really dealing with in America. Far too many of us, as Jewel has somewhat suggested, think that the dark days are over, that bigotry, hatred, prejudice, oppression is gone. Many think we're living in the best of times. But God, as my mother would say when she was alive, pulled the rag off the bush so that we could see how mean, how selfish, and how racial and how divided this country is. Who would have thought that 72 plus million folk would have embraced Trumpism, this ideology that suggests that those who have will get more and those who have less will be neglected. Whoever would have thought that this country would have embraced an idiot? God has shown us that people still love to follow liars. They still love to follow idiots. They still love to follow dictators. So 2020 was more than anything else, to me, a revelation from God that the selfish people in this country do not see life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness as a goal for all.
Right.
It's only for the chosen few. And I think that the time is just right for the church to do some great work in re-educating our people and doing more in terms of political development and following this great model that our leaders in Georgia has given us.
Yeah.
So that we can go in a new direction in 22 and onward into the future. We can no longer look at life blindly and think that God is happy with us when we look at it blindly, because he is showing us that this world is upside down.
Yeah. Well said, Doc. Well said. Dr. Francois, I want that same question for you to respond to the same question in terms of lessons we learned about the soul of this nation, but also what then, because Dr. Canty just talked about the opportunity we have, what then should the Black church, what should progressive be doing to speak prophetically to such an hour by way of the kind of ministry we are engaged in, given the dynamic, and I don't even want to use that word because it's too positive, but given the sickness that characterizes the division of this nation, that characterizes the selfishness that speaks of so many in this country. So again, to rephrase it, you know, what lessons do you see us discerning from what this election revealed about the soul of this country? And at the same time, what should we be doing now, given the nature of the sickness?
Good. I think that it's important to name that this country has lived with pre-existing sicknesses of racism, sexism, and predatory capitalism well before we were living under a pandemic of COVID-19. There has been something in the very DNA of our nation that has consistently tried to compromise the breathing of Black, brown, and poor folk. And so COVID, in a real sense, is a radical cautionary mirror into what is wrong with America's systems. And so it is these pre-existing conditions that live in the economic body of America that is obviously pro-white, that is obviously anti-immigrant, that is obviously anti-Black, and in many cases anti-woman, that we have to attend to as not an aberration in the American project, but is really at the heart of what is wrong with America. What we saw is that this election, while it significant electoral college difference, when you go into those cities, those states, and really cities there, because we don't just owe Michigan, we owe Detroit. We don't just owe Georgia, we owe Atlanta. We don't just owe Pennsylvania, we owe Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. These cities that have strong Black power and strong Black voting history. We owe them, and I'll say a little more about that in a minute. But we have to be honest about the fact that this election was so close because we are so able to hold our nose to white supremacy for individual gain. Is that there is this belief that Donald Trump is an economic messiah for America. We've allowed ourselves to believe that this businessman who bankrupted his own businesses can somehow balance the books of a nation. We've convinced ourselves that instead of knowing that he has done nothing but not mess up an Obama-Biden economy, we would rather believe that he's built a Trump economy, when the reality is that he just hasn't messed up the Biden Obama economy. And so because we want to see him as an economic messiah, we're willing to hold our noses to racism, and we're willing to behold the death of 400,000 Americans potentially by inauguration day, because we believe that he is good for our economy. So it tells us that America is way more capitalist, and I'm talking about an anti-Black, anti-woman, anti-immigrant type of capitalism than it is anything else. We've also learned that this country's systems are deeply fragile. If one man in one term can threaten the fabric of a democracy, it helps us to understand that this democracy is only really only one dictator, one despotic leader away from us losing all of these things that my ancestors, that our ancestors have fought for. And so, if nothing else, it should show us just how fragile this democracy is, primarily because the man who lost has not accepted that loss almost 2 weeks after a loss. And so we have to be clear that the fabric of our democracy is more fragile than we think it is. But it also helps us to see just how Black people have been and continue to be democracy first responders. When democracy is flatlining, Black folks show up at the polls. When democracy is flatlining, Black folks show up outside the White House with protest shoes on. When democracy is flatlining, Black people flood the streets and demand that Black lives matter. And so what we're seeing now is the power of Black folk as democracy first responders. And we have to be clear that Black churches have been the womb of Black power, Black political power, Black economic power. And so in a very real sense, we owe this country owes Black churches. And I'm not talking about Black pastors. I'm talking about I'm talking about the Black women who fund Black churches. I'm talking about the Black children who grew up in Black churches but walked away because of our own internalized bigotry towards one another that exists in our churches. I'm talking about Black church in terms of folk who love God and believe in Jesus, but don't necessarily walk into our buildings. They saved this country from 4 more years of white supremacist narcissism, and I think that at some point we have to figure out, as Black churches that have done a great job of alienating women, a great job of disempowering younger generations, a great job of empowering folk who don't deserve power, that we have to find a way to really figure out how do we create equity within our walls so that we can be a credible force of justice outside of our walls.
Yeah, wow. Thank you so much. Thank you. Mr. President, you have watched the last 4 years, democracy, as Dr. Francois has alluded to, become so fragile, it almost unraveled. And you have watched a president bring bigotry into foreign policy. You have a global vision for the witness of progressive. And so, given your global vision, given all that you have witnessed, and given the fact that, again, in the States, the election is over, what's next? How can the Progressive National Baptist Convention shape a global consciousness for the country, for this nation, for the United States, I'm saying, that is more just and
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Wonderful. Yeah, we're having some issues here with the internet service. So from time to time, we may have some issues. Dr. Haynes, Dr. Francois, and others have rightly intimated that obviously democracy in its most virtuous of terms is still a work in progress. For the last, I would say since World War II, we promoted democracy as a done deal, as something entrenched. So much so that our leading nations were willing to go to war and kill in the name of democracy. And so we see that, no, it's not a done deal. It's still a work in progress. And just maybe we need to be less arrogant as it relates to how we promote the tenets of democracy and how we go about seeking to embrace nations, some stronger than others, realizing that if America can reach this stage, certainly other nations with less resources, with less power, with less clout, can also struggle. There's another lesson here for us, and that is that since post-Reconstruction, when we had, just after we had the first proliferation of Black congressmen and Black legislators throughout the United States of America, we see that there was a move post-Reconstruction to abort all the gains that had begun during the Lincoln Project. After the 1965 Voting Rights Act, there was another proliferation of Black input, be they legislators, etc., mayors, congresspersons, etc. And now we have another post-Reconstruction going on. As a matter of fact, that's what after Obama was supposed to accomplish with Trump. And so to the extent that his agenda was expanded beyond the borders of the United States, globally, is to the extent that progressive has to awaken a global vision.
Yeah.
With regards to how we now be consistent as it relates to preparing for the fight.
Yeah.
We can never allow ourselves at no point to be lulled into the euphoria that we've arrived, that we've accomplished, because now we know,
yes, sir,
that there is always going to be a backlash.
Yes, sir.
To our progress.
Come on.
And that is what we need to prepare ourselves for and this generation.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Mr. President. That, again, history has a way of repeating itself if we don't learn the lessons. And so yes. Thank you so much for that insight. Given that, and I want to piggyback on that and invite all of you to respond to this. In 2008, Obama wins the presidency, and while we were partying, the Tea Party went to planning, and they basically set the stage for what became the Trump presidency, as well as taking over local and state, occupied offices. They just took over while we were partying. They were planning. And I think we have an opportunity, and I thank you again for your history lesson, Mr. President. We have an opportunity to learn from history, especially given the fact that we heard something from a president-elect
that we've never heard in all the centuries of this country. When the president-elect, Joseph Biden, gave his acceptance speech, he specifically said he thanked the African-American community for having his back. And then he promised to always have our backs. I maintain that we have a responsibility to show him and tell him what it looks like to have our back. We don't want him to say, this is how I'm gonna have your back. No, we're gonna tell him, Mr. President, this is how we need you to have our back. And so I'm gonna ask you, distinguished panel, prophetic witnesses, how do you think, what does President Biden having our back look like?
One of the things I would definitely say, Dr. Haynes, is doing everything that he possibly can to help our people get health care. As we've seen throughout this pandemic and even before, as the healthcare plan has been gutted on top of gutted on top of gutted, I mean, down to pretty much the bare bones, my desire would be that he would use his influence and relationships to strengthen those plans again so that we can get health care in our communities, so that we can get programs in our communities for our children and the those who are homeless and marginalized, restore back what has been taken away and stripped. So healthcare is my number one request.
Good, good. Any others? Any others?
Let me respond by suggesting that you raise a critical question, Dr. Haynes, but I think we as a people must first decide what it is that we want out of government. Let's not forget, we allowed Ronald Reagan,
my Lord,
to teach us that we did not need leaders, that we could speak for ourselves. It did a terrible job on leadership and on organized labor, et cetera, in this country. I think if we're gonna help Mr. Biden understand what he can best do for us, we must first shape a strategy that bring our people back together. Our convention, the Progressive Convention, in my opinion, must collapse its walls, make room for Black Lives Matter, and for other groups, and for other social issues, so that we are not fragmented, so that we don't have 1,000 different agendas.
yeah,
There needs to be an overarching strategy that pulls us together, and with that togetherness, goals will emerge that will help us frame the theology and frame the conversation, not only with Mr. Biden, but with the rest of this country and the world. We have not done that in the past. We have responded.
yeah.
We have allowed others to frame the debate. And they have patiently developed plans. For instance, this new Supreme Court, that effort started in 1954. It didn't start yesterday. They've been working all of these years to make that happen.
Right.
So we can't look for instant pudding. We've got to come up with solid plans that are very inclusive, that bring us together, so as we stand together, others see our strength and new doors are open.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well said, Doc. Well said. Dr. Francois, given that, and again, it goes back to our defining what, him having our back looks like. What does it look like? What are those plans, those well-defined plans Dr. Canty just talked about?
Yeah. So I'm, the history behind the question, I think, is also a cautionary tale for us, because we forget that we live in a democracy, and the fourth branch of government is the people. We live in a co-governance. Hopefully, we're able to create a system of co-governance where we're able to remind ourselves that the real power of a democracy is vested in the people, and not in those that we have in office. And so I hope that what this process looks like of us holding the president, vice president, and Washington accountable is that the same way we had mass rallies in Washington under the Trump administration, is that we'll have those same kind of mass rallies in Washington under this next administration. We need a Black Lives. We need to flood Black Lives Matter Plaza under Biden the same way we did under Trump. We need a women's march the day after inauguration, the same way we did with Trump. We need a sunrise movement march happening so that we can make some gains on environmental justice under the Biden administration, the same way we did under the Trump administration. I think we also need a March for Our Lives to happen in Washington so that we can make sure that we are letting the NRA know that they do not have ultimate power over gun legislation in our country, the same way we did it under a Trump. We have to do it under a Biden-Harris administration. And so what is this? So that's a window into what kind of policies we need, just by me saying how we need to show up in dynamic ways as a force, a sole force of accountability in ways that we did not do in 2008. Listen, we need to demand single payer health care. No one should leave a hospital with a bill for essential services. Recreational services may be a different question, but for essential services, no one should leave the hospital with a bill. If they can do it to the north of us in Canada, surely we can do it in this country. We need him to take a leading. We need the Biden-Harris administration to take a leading role in what it means to end mass incarceration and to decarcerate this country. Both Harris and Biden have played a role in the hyper incarceration on different levels, but in the hyper incarceration of Black bodies. And I think that here's an opportunity for them to undo and to offer some structural repair for the kind of policies that they've supported in the past. So that's ending mass incarceration has to be a number one priority. It's changing our drug laws in this country, making sure that mandatory minimums are not straitjacketing our judges in this country. I think it's something that they need to do in order to show that they have our back. We know that there needs to be no more conversation about reparations, monetary reparations for the descendants of slaves. There needs to be legislation on it, and not legislation to study. HR 40 is nice, but we don't need to study reparations as a nation. Enough nonprofits, enough universities have studied the economic impact of slavery and beyond. So we need to trust the data, and we need legislation to follow the data so that there is race-specific, race-conscious legislation that directly benefits Black people, and some kind of reparations is a way to do that. We need free college. And in addition to free college, we need some monetary mercy by declaring the abolition of student loan debt for the millions of Americans that make up the $1.5 trillion of debt that exist in education. And then the last thing is we need to, and this by no means the last, but we need a universal jobs guarantee. Maybe it's the Green New Deal, maybe it's not the Green New Deal, but we need a jobs guarantee that says that anybody that wants to work in this country can work in this country. It's what Dr. King calls the federal government as the employer of last resort. The federal government has the power, it has the reach, and has the money to create jobs at the drop of a dime so that anybody in this country who needs a job should be able to get a high wage paying job that the federal government is responsible for creating.
Thank you so much. And I really appreciate, Doc, your fearlessness in making the case that we should not be shy and have no shame in our prophetic game when it comes to saying that there were race-specific policies that disadvantaged us through the centuries in this country. There were race-specific policies that advantaged white people, the Homestead Act, and we can call the roll from the GI Bill as well as to Social Security at its inception, FHA loans. They were race-specific in terms of who they benefited. And so we should have no shame in our prophetic progressive game when it comes to saying we recognize that race-specific policies targeted us for disadvantage, advantaged others, and now it's time for race-specific policies to advantage those who have been disadvantaged. So thank you, man, for your clarity and your courage in making that clear. Mr. President, given all of this, and given your prophetic vision, and given your wisdom, because you made the profound point, you checked history to show us how we got where we are. So my question now is, Mr. President, from your vantage point, how is Progressive preparing to engage this current, not the current, but the incoming administration, the Biden administration? How is Progressive having the benefit of the wisdom of the lessons of the past? How should we engage in the Biden administration, Biden-Harris administration?
First, I believe that we have to be able to truly identify what we are dealing with, this phenomenon that we are dealing with. We've just spoke about the historical antecedents to this radicalism. Now, we need to ask the pivotal question: did Trump choose them, or did they choose Trump? In other words, did Trump actually coalesce the alt-right, the evangelicals, and other groupings that formed his coalition, or did they choose him? And if they chose him, it means we are dealing with something even more serious. Because now, to counteract that, if they chose him, it means then that we who are more progressive, we need now to coalesce and to literally combine our efforts. All areas. Yeah, you may call some, they call some on the left, and they call some moderates, and all of us now must find a way to, as Dr. Canty indicated, we have to literally combine our efforts so that Biden-Harris administration is not alone. But just like Trump can he can count on how many? 45% of his people. Biden need to be able to count on 50% of his people. So that, because this now is a fight, literally, for our survival, literally. And we have to see our survival as part of the strategy.
Yeah.
Dr. Haynes, when you talk about, and Dr. Stewart talk about strategy, one of the most pronounced strategies I noticed with this past administration was there was rarely a time when a senator, a governor, someone in a cabinet would speak against the president's actions. That was probably one of the most unified fronts that I've probably ever seen throughout the entire history of government in my lifetime. And so when you talk about what we can do to support Biden, some kind of way we have to come to a unified front. Yes, we got to raise our issues. Yes, we need to come together and think about what it is that we want. But when I tell you they stood together from the White House to the evangelical house. In some kind of way, we've got to find unity in the party to be able to have a voice that says, I'm going to stand behind him no matter what. Now, does it mean that we accept whatever is handed to us? No, I'm not saying that. But the pronunciation has been historically part of our party that says that there is division and everybody knows it. Some kind of way we got to do something with it.
I appreciate that. You made an allusion to a group that I was wondering if we should discuss. I think we'll give them a few minutes time because this group has shown themselves, they've shown their colors, I should say, and that is right-wing white evangelicals. White evangelicals, regardless, have supported this president. And you heard Paula White in some crazed rant, use, I guess, other tongues she would call them, to even ask for angels from Africa to rescue the election in the favor of Trump. And we all know that, as Jamal Bryant said, that sadly, the Black church helped to build her ministry and prop her up. But we also have Robert Jeffries. We also have Franklin Graham. We also have Jerry Falwell Jr. and so many John MacArthur, and so many nameless white evangelicals who have shown us their colors. And my question is, and even Paula White's son had the unmitigated gall and the racist temerity to call out Black preachers and say that, we, stand up for race, but we forget about the aborted babies because that's their big thing, abortion. So my question to us is, what do we do with our brothers and sisters in the white evangelical community in the aftermath of this election? That's for all of y'all.
Well, let me go first. This is very interesting. You've brought up the white evangelicals. I have just formed a conclusion. I've just come to a conclusion with regards to the white evangelicals, because I couldn't understand. I had a problem with how they were able to support a mission, an agenda that fought race relations advancing. How was it that they were able to be silent on the matter of the killings, and how were they able to as if it was okay with them, as if that part of it was okay? How was it that they were able to be quiet with no work effort being done to ameliorate COVID-19, the virus? I mean, and so many deaths. I came to a conclusion. And the conclusion I came to was that our ancestors knew something that the white evangelicals did not. And that was the concept of sacrifice that is at the heart of our theology. The white evangelicals, their sacrifice only goes as far as Jesus's sacrifice for us. But within the Black community, we also appreciate that not only must Jesus Christ bear the cross, but we also must bear it.
Yeah.
And that's why we were told to offer ourselves as living sacrifices. The white evangelicals have been able to put a theology together while maintaining racism. No sacrifice.
Come on.
While exploiting the resources, while exploiting nature. No sacrifice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Our ancestors knew something that the white evangelicals did not.
Well, white evangelicalism is still finding ways to live at the expense of innocent blood being shed. Seemingly, the death of an innocent Jesus was not enough for them to be saved. That now they need the innocent deaths of the rest of us. And I think that is part of the tragedy, the predatory individualism that lives within white evangelicalism, is that it is, and I love that presidents talk about it, there's nothing self-sacrificing about it, because it has bought into an ethos that says that everything else should die in order for it to live.
Right.
And we have to attend to that dynamic clearly. Something about evangelicalism, and this comes from Michael Emerson, this book, Divided by Faith, that white evangelicalism, it does not understand the concept of structural inequality. It believes that every decision, every outcome in one's life is either connected to something God has done to this person, or a byproduct of this person's own work. And it's that anti-structuralist reading of evangelicalism that never allows whiteness, that form of whiteness, to perceive the kind of structural, systemic nature of our pain. And I think that there has to be some education within that community that takes seriously the fact that they are beneficiaries of a structure that privileges them, and we are disadvantaged by a structure that privileges them. And that has to be, you know, I've had many conversations where they still call, where they legitimately, in my face, call white privilege white blessings. This is something that is deeply embedded. It is a kind of spiritual entitlement of whiteness that suggests that what they are experiencing is because God favors them over others, and there has to be some atoning for that. I've gotten to the point, honestly, Dr. Haynes, is that as much as it's my job to spread the gospel of Jesus, it's not my job to save white people from white supremacy. It's not my job to save white evangelicalism from being more white than it is Christian. That's too much of a burden for us to carry. So this is my call for that. It's time for us, those of us who are progressive Baptists, it's time for us to tell our progressive white Baptists that it's their job to rein in and help with the exorcism of the demonic whiteness that is co-opting white evangelicalism. Is that we need more of our liberal white brothers and sisters who call themselves Christian and Baptist to now see themselves as exorcists. And they have to exorcise the demon of whiteness that has been allowed to live in the Southern Baptist Convention, that's been allowed to live in these evangelical non-denominational circles, that has been allowed to live and curry favor with the Republican Party. It's time for them to call them out, because of the lie that white evangelicalism is propped up on, this belief in this radical commitment to the family, this lie that it has propped himself up on. It's why Donald Trump got 300 judges over the past past 4 years, and in 8 years Barack Obama was only able to get 90 plus, right? It is this lie that white evangelical is propped up on about being moral, about being committed to families, when it's really committed to capital and money, capital and whiteness, that we need progressive white folk to stand up on and do their part. Black folk have been trying to rid this country of white supremacy for too long. It's time for white people to stand up and do the part. We save this country almost every election. It's time for white people to actually stand up and do their part. And I think it's our job as progressive Baptists to now put some pressure on our white friends who claim to be non-racist and say, no, it's time for you to get in the game as anti-racist. And it's time for you to lay down your own white privilege by calling out your brothers and sisters who are being terrorized by being possessed by whiteness in ways that we don't talk about how white supremacy actually damages the humanity of white folk, right? It corrodes the soul of white people. And if we can offer anything, it's for us to tell our white friends to get in the game and take the burden off of Black folk from trying to save this country from itself, trying to save white people from themselves. And we must finally, I say this often, we must finally crucify the white Americanized Christ and let him stay in the tomb.
Hallelujah. Hallelujah. You preach that, prophet. Thank you. Thank you. Let me just say, because we have 5 minutes left, I believe. And so I'm going to ask you now to give concluding statements. I thank you so much for the profundity of your prophetic witness, the clarity of your communication. And I would just ask you in your closing statement, the election is over. Now what? What should be the agenda that progressive takes to the administration that's coming in, but also on state and local levels? Give me that in 1 minute, each of you.
For For me, I would say progressive has such an amazing opportunity right now. For so long, we as a people have put all of our efforts, or at least a large portion of our effort, into national presidential elections. And I believe times like these implore upon us even more to see that it is just as important for us to push heavily for our local and state elections. Georgia right now is at a point, we have one of our very own, Dr. Ralph Warnock, who is up and could be the tipping point that
Right.
puts the Senate towards our incoming president. And so it is important for us to rally around our own. It's important for us to push our next generations into politics so that they can help make decisions and get us where we need to be as a people. It's important for us to lobby for our own to be the next judges, so that 300 becomes more balanced in nature, in color, as well as in policy. And so Progressive has a phenomenal opportunity to be part of that groundwork on a local and state level.
Thank you.
Well, let me just say that we must say to ourselves and to our fellows universally that normal is now behind us. We can never, ever go back to the way things were. We will insist on a new direction, a new way of life, a new ideology. And we will give our lives to ensure that our people have a quality of life that's equal to that of any other.
Amen. Amen. Thank you.
It's time that as a convention that we begin to that we continue to tell the story of the origins of our convention, to be clear that we are a part of that pantheon of civil rights organizations, faith-based civil rights organizations, as the denominational home, not just of Dr. King, but the denominational home of the civil rights movement, particularly as it relates to being Baptist. And that gives us social capital, it gives us spiritual capital, it gives us political capital to make some demands from our allies, make some demands from the folk that we put in office, because to be clear, that these next 4 years will determine what happens in the next election. And if this administration lets Black folk down the way other Democratic administrations have, then we have the opportunity, the unfortunate opportunity to possibly delivering this country again to the type of regime that we just liberated ourselves from. So this country, and so this administration, if it wants to save this country, then it's going to have to do right by Black people again. And I list some demands earlier, but here's what they need to do. They need to do everything they can to make sure that the racial wealth gap in this country, which now it would take 228 years for Black wealth to catch up to white wealth. If we froze white wealth today, they need to do everything they can in these next 4 years to create some economic parity so that it won't take a criminal 228 years for Black wealth to catch up to white wealth, which means you need to give us reparations in some way, shape, or form if you want to save this democracy.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you.
I would say, in concluding, as it relates to supporting the entire progressive agenda, both locally and or statewide and nationally, I would say that we have to be able to connect the dots between our cause and our survival,
Hmm.
our cause and our survival. In other words, we must be able to basically indicate that until and except we support the entire framework, not just the leading person, because, you know, as a people of survival, we were only needed to know the person at the top. But now we need to be able to be agenda driven.
Yeah.
Rather than personality driven. So if we're going to drive this agenda, then we are going to have to do a restructuring and a reframing of how we support the entire electorate, those persons who are brought before us to be elected. And we need to literally support everything that supports our agenda.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you so much, Mr. President. What a fitting conclusion to our time together. I want to thank you so much for the wisdom that we have been blessed to receive. I invite all of you to be mindful of the fact that our board meeting is coming up the 18th through the 20th of January. How fitting that our board meeting will lead right into the inauguration of the next president. So you know that being progressive, having Dr. Stewart as our leader, that those 3 days will be days that set the tone for the inauguration as we, according to our president, have an agenda that directs and dictates what it is we shall be doing, both as a convention as well as in our prophetic influence of this nation. I hope and pray that you'll spread the word about the progressive hour. What an hour it has been. Could you not tarry 1 hour? That's what Jesus said. Could you not tarry 1 hour? This is 1 hour that you never, ever want to miss. It's the progressive hour. Now the Lord bless and keep you. The Lord cause God's face to shine on you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up the light of God's countenance upon you and grant you peace in the matchless name of our resurrected revolutionary, our Lord and liberator, Jesus the Christ. Amen.